We deployed as a squad of 12, but our shadows numbered 13 from the moment we set foot on the ash. I noted it before I allowed myself to breathe through the filter, a spare silhouette trailing our file, a smear of night that clung to our pattern, no matter the angle of the pallid sun. Sergeant Kalen Voss, 47th Mordian Iron Guard, Combat Log Supplemental. The impossible began at grid reference Ashen 77, where the ash defies every law of physics drilled into us during atmospheric warfare training. The ash here does not fall. It rises in slow, patient threads, curling around ancient survey pylons in spirals that refuse wind and reason. Each crystalline particle catches thermals that shouldn't exist in this dead atmosphere, ascending in geometric patterns that hurt to observe directly. Perfect helices dissolve into angular formations, triangles becoming hexagons, becoming impossible polyhedrons that chime softly when they strike our armor plating. I ordered helmets sealed, safeties checked, and we marched. Mordian boots met a crust that sounded like shattered reliquaries beneath our weight. The ashen marches lay ahead in a glaze of bone-grey light, a flat country broken by ancient survey markers and glassed hummocks, every horizon a smudge against Cineris Tertius's perpetual twilight. Temperature readings contradicted environmental sensors. My suit registered -40°C, yet geothermal scans indicated volcanic activity 3 kilometers below. The Vox marked our entry as 413 local. I repeated the mission brief across the squad, formal as catechism. Cineris Tertius, Southern Polar Flats, Ashen Marches Sector, Retrieval and Audit. 3 Magos supervised survey teams overdue by 72 hours. Last ping from Marker 31. Stormfront Caldera approaching in 18 hours. After that, tracking becomes unviable. Engineer Row 9 clicked ascent in Binharik, a cold sprinkle in the Vox that tasted of oil and sacred unguents. His augmetic eye twitched with recognition at the pre-imperial iconography etched into each marker, symbols that made his mechadendrites writhe with unconscious agitation. Confessor Matthias walked 2 paces behind my left shoulder, murmuring the march of unshaken faith under breath that smoked in the paradoxical chill. 10 guardsmen kept interval and bearing, their faces etched with the grim resolve common to those who serve the Emperor in the galaxy's darker corners. Cold burned through layered flak, despite the ground's faint, unsettling warmth radiating through our boots. The wind came off the flats like a morgue drawer opening, carrying the metallic taste of ozone despite atmospheric readings showing standard oxygen-nitrogen composition. The ash, light as pollen yet heavy as sin, threaded upward and worked itself into the seams of thought. Every breath through our rebreathers carried particles that moved like living tissue under magnification. It began as a tremor in the soles of our boots, so slight, I thought it my own pulse. Then it disciplined itself into timing. Every 13 seconds, a low harmonic rose through the ground, through leather and ceramite, through the calcified nerves of Mordian discipline, and settled in our teeth. I checked my chronometer and felt my jaw align with the next thrum. The frequency bypassed our ears and settled deep within our bones, a rhythmic heartbeat of the marches that spoke of ancient, hidden things. Equipment anomalies manifested with unnerving regularity. Lasgun power cells showed manufacture dates 13 years in the future. Vox frequencies drifted to 13.7 kHz without manual adjustment, carrying a faint carrier tone that sat at the edge of hearing like a sung note. Serial numbers ended in 13, weapons, ammunition, even our chronometers synchronized to an impossible rhythm of 13 beats per standard minute. Confessor Matthias led our marching litany, but the words echoed with the slightest delay, as if the marches mouthed the prayer back with mockery on its tongue. The Emperor protects those who serve his will, he intoned, but the syllables returned, rearranged. His will protects those who serve the Emperor. The subtle alteration crawled across my skin beneath reinforced flak armor. We crossed marker 29, and the spiral at its crown widened, becoming a gyre that hovered in defiance of wind. Row 9 extended a brass wand, and the ash flocked to it, arranged itself into a perfect triangle that resolved into a hexagon, then a 13-pointed star. He hissed in Binharik, and the formation flattened, its points folding inward like a closed eye. The gust that answered was not air, but absence, a subtractive chill that took warmth from our bones without moving a grain of ash. We found evidence of the survey teams in scattered equipment half buried in drifts, personal effects arranged in ritualistic patterns based on the number 13, each item placed with mathematical exactitude that suggested measurements conducted beyond normal space. Row 9's auspex detected chronological displacement signatures and observational cascade matrices, technical jargon that meant nothing to a line sergeant but everything to his augmetic arrays. The ruins stretched across the horizon like broken teeth, pre-imperial but human in origin. Each collapsed spire maintained exact angular relationships to its neighbours, as if destruction followed geometric principles rather than structural failure. The ash around these formations had fused into crystalline structures that reflected light in impossible directions, creating shadows that pointed toward the sun. At 900 meters, Trooper Caney raised the auspex and swept our formation. 12 heat signatures, he reported, then paused, recalibrating. The display flickered, showing our tactical formation in perfect detail. 12 guardsmen maintaining proper spacing and equipment loadout. Then he turned the scanner on himself, checking calibration, and the screen registered 13 contacts. The extra reading always appeared directly behind whoever operated the scanner, maintaining perfect distance regardless of movement or facing. I took the instrument and felt an old Mordian calm flow into the places fear had vacated. The 13th signature ghosted at the edge of perception, then slipped close, then touched the rim of awareness with predatory grace. Row 9, I said, almost gently. How many heat signatures do you read in our formation? He scanned, relays clicked, and replied with doctrinal precision. 13, Sergeant. 12 guardsmen. 1 additional source, unregistered, range 0. It is standing directly behind whoever holds the instrument. The harmonic thrum pulsed through the ground. The 13th shadow stretched behind me in the ash-filtered light. I did not turn around. I did not turn around. Standard protocol demanded maintaining forward momentum when facing unidentified contacts, and the 13th signature would receive no acknowledgement from Mordian discipline. Advance in tactical formation, I ordered, adjusting our intervals to maintain overlapping fields of fire across terrain that violated every atmospheric physics principle drilled into guard training protocols. The upward falling ash intensified with each kilometre, rising in streams that formed geometric patterns too precise for natural weather systems. Perfect spirals dissolved into angular formations, triangles becoming hexagons, becoming impossible polyhedrons that chimed softly when they struck our ceramite armor plating. Each crystalline particle caught thermals that shouldn't exist in this dead atmosphere, ascending in helical patterns that hurt to observe directly. Trooper Nex took point position, his respirator already showing amber contamination warnings. The filters registered acceptable parameters, but the ash moved like microscopic organisms under magnification, squirming against the filter matrix with surface tension that suggested memory rather than mineral composition. Overlapping fields of fire, I commanded, establishing tactical positions as we crossed broken ground toward marker 31. Confessor Matthias maintained our marching cadence with the march of unshaken faith, his voice carrying practiced authority across the formation. The Emperor's light illuminates the darkest corners of his domain, he intoned, but the crystalline formations ahead returned the words with syllables rearranged. His domain illuminates the darkest corners of the Emperor's light. The subtle alteration crawled beneath our flak armor like a living thing seeking warmth. Engine Seer Row 9 activated new spheric dampeners as his augmetic arrays processed impossible data streams. Binharic cant flowed through the vox in sacred patterns, but interference corrupted the machine language into fragments that spoke of chronological displacement signatures and observational cascade matrices. His mechadendrites writhed with unconscious agitation as they registered readings that defied Mechanicus orthodoxy. The harmonic resonance pulsed through our boots every 13 seconds, synchronizing with biological functions despite our sealed environmental systems. Temperature readings fluctuated between -40 Celsius and geothermal warmth, creating thermal layers that bent light into impossible refractions. The metallic taste of ozone intensified through our rebreathers, despite atmospheric readings showing standard nitrogen-oxygen composition. At grid reference, Ashen 8.4, environmental conditions escalated beyond acceptable parameters. The ash around ancient survey markers had fused into crystalline structures that reflected light in directions violating optical physics. Shadows pointed toward the sun, while illumination emanated from beneath the ground, creating visual paradoxes that made depth perception unreliable for tactical coordination. "Sergeant," Nex reported, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Filter warning. Something's wrong." I signaled a halt under an overhang of vitrified rock. He snapped his respirator free, and the contaminated filters unfurled like damp organic petals. The ash clung to the matrix, with elasticity I recognized from living tissue, writhing against examination as if it disliked observation. Row 9's servo clamps lifted a corner of the filter material. It stretched, resisting with biomechanical properties that made his optical arrays flicker with recognition patterns. "Unclean geometry," he whispered in Binharic, the machine cant carrying harmonics that matched the ground's rhythmic pulse. His sanctified torch flared blue, and the ash collapsed to ordinary powder, retreating from blessed flame like something capable of pain. We discovered the first survey team's abandoned camp arranged in perfect 13-pointed star formations. Equipment positioned with mathematical exactitude that suggested measurements conducted beyond normal space. Data slates, power cells, personal effects placed according to geometric principles that hurt to contemplate directly. Each item maintained precise relationships to its neighbors, creating patterns that implied knowledge of dimensional mathematics beyond imperial understanding. A single voxcaster remained active, broadcasting on frequency 13.7 kHz with perfect clarity. Static resolved into familiar voices. Our own tactical communications transmitted 23 minutes before we arrived at the coordinates. "Advance in tactical formation," my own voice reported through the speaker, followed by Nex's point position acknowledgement and Matthias's liturgical responses. The temporal displacement created feedback loops that violated causality itself. Orders echoed before I spoke them, responses arrived ahead of questions, and the Vox traffic created a prophetic narrative of our approach that had been broadcasting for 72 hours. Each transmission matched our actual communications with disturbing accuracy, as if the equipment predicted rather than recorded our tactical decisions. Trooper Caney examined abandoned personal effects with growing unease. Prayer scrolls inscribed with the Litany of the 13th Eye, an apocryphal text supposedly burned during the Age of Apostasy. Chronometers synchronized to impossible rhythms that counted moments not yet experienced. Data slates displaying star charts showing constellations in positions they would not occupy for 13,000 years. "Sergeant," Row 9 reported, his augmetic voice carrying harmonics synchronized with the environmental resonance. The camp arrangement follows observational cascade matrices. The missing team was conducting measurements that became self-perpetuating. Each reading generated the next reading in an infinite loop of data collection that continues without observers. The Voxcaster crackled with increasing intensity, transmitting our future movements with prophetic accuracy. Tactical decisions I had not yet made echoed through the speaker, followed by responses from squad members who had not yet spoken. The temporal feedback suggested our actions were predetermined rather than chosen, following patterns established by the missing survey team's measurements. as I examined a data slate left behind by the vanished surveyors. Its screen reflected my image performing actions I had not yet decided to take. Reaching for a sidearm, shouting warnings for threats that had not manifested, giving orders that remained unspoken. The reflection moved independently, demonstrating tactical responses to dangers that existed 23 minutes in the future. The future Voss mouthed words I could not hear, warnings meant for a present that had not yet arrived, while the data slate displayed timestamp readings ahead of our chronometers, showing tactical data for positions we had not yet reached. The future Voss in the data slate's reflection drew his sidearm with practiced efficiency, aiming at threats that existed 23 minutes ahead of our present timeline. I maintained observation protocols despite the temporal paradox, noting how his warning gestures preceded environmental changes by the exact displacement interval recorded by the active Voxcaster. The reflection moved independently, demonstrating tactical responses to dangers that had not yet manifested in our current position. "Secure all data slates," I ordered, snapping the device shut to eliminate the temporal feedback loop. "No direct interaction with predictive displays. Confessor, examine those prayer scrolls. Everyone else, maintain distance from artifacts while cataloging their arrangement." Standard investigation procedures applied despite impossible circumstances. Each personal effect had been positioned with mathematical precision that suggested ritualistic arrangement rather than hasty abandonment. Prayer beads counted in 13s, chronometers synchronized to rhythms matching the harmonic pulse beneath our boots, ration packs stacked in perfect geometric formations that hurt to observe directly. The missing survey teams had not abandoned their equipment. They had arranged it according to principles beyond Imperial understanding. Trooper Valen discovered measurement logs scattered in perfect patterns around the camp's perimeter. Each data slate contained readings that built upon previous observations, creating cascading sequences where measurements generated their own necessity for further measurement. The temporal feedback had transformed scientific investigation into self-perpetuating ritual, with each observation requiring additional observations in infinite regression. "Sergeant," Confessor Matthias called, his voice carrying liturgical authority despite evident unease. "These scrolls contain the Litany of the 13th Eye, apocryphal text supposedly destroyed during the Age of Apostasy." He held parchment with sanctified gloves, but the text writhed beneath observation, rearranging syllables into patterns that violated optical physics. It describes observation as sacred duty, watchers who maintain reality through eternal vigilance, 13 eyes that see across time itself. The litany spoke of consciousness, reshaping causality through focused attention, geometric formulas disguised as religious instruction, mathematical principles embedded in devotional language. Each verse contained dimensional relationships that described how observation could alter the observed, how measurement could become manifestation. The text suggested the survey teams had not been investigating an anomaly. They had become components in its function. Row 9 analysed the camp's arrangement with increasing agitation, mechadendrites writhing as they processed data violating Mechanicus orthodoxy. "Observational cascade matrices," he reported in Binharic cant, corrupted by harmonic interference. Each measurement created necessity for additional measurements. The survey equipment has been incorporated into a larger observational network spanning the entire Ashen marches. Environmental conditions escalated beyond acceptable parameters as we examined abandoned instruments. The upward falling ash formed complex three-dimensional mandalas before dissolving, creating geometric patterns existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Crystalline formations around the camp reflected light in impossible directions. Shadows pointing toward the sun, while illumination emanated from beneath the ground, generating visual paradoxes that made depth perception unreliable. The harmonic resonance intensified, pulsing through our bones with increasing frequency until it synchronized with biological functions despite sealed environmental systems. Heartbeats aligned with the rhythm, Breathing patterns matched the pulse. Neural activity began resonating with frequencies originating from deep beneath the marches. The synchronization felt like submission to something vast and patient that had been waiting for conscious observers. Equipment integration accelerating, Row 9 observed. Augmetic arrays flickering with recognition patterns as they processed data beyond designed parameters. Trooper Kaney's chronometer displayed impossible readings, timestamps ahead of actual time, countdown sequences for unscheduled events, temporal coordinates suggesting measurement of duration rather than moments. The device had fused partially with his wrist, its face showing crystalline formations matching geometric patterns in ascending ash. Personal effects told a story of gradual transformation rather than sudden disappearance. Clothing arranged in ritual patterns, weapons positioned according to geometric principles, prayer books opened to verses describing observation as sacred duty. The missing survey teams had not been taken. They had been recruited, converted from investigators into participants in whatever process their measurements had awakened. The active Voxcaster continued broadcasting our approach with prophetic accuracy, transmitting tactical communications occurring 23 minutes in the future. Squad proceeds to grid reference Ashen 9-7, my own voice reported through the speaker. Large subsurface energy signature detected. Temporal displacement probability exceeds acceptable parameters. Orders I had not yet given echoed with disturbing clarity, followed by responses from squad members who had not yet spoken. Near the camp's center, a perfectly circular pool of crystalline ash moved in slow, hypnotic spirals, despite the absence of wind or thermal currents. The formation maintained perfect geometric relationships, creating a mirror that reflected not light, but observation itself. As I approached, the surface showed my reflection performing actions 23 minutes ahead, drawing my sidearm, shouting warnings for threats that had not yet manifested, giving tactical orders that remained unspoken. "It shows what it sees," Valen whispered, his voice hushed with recognition. The ash pool displayed multiple timeline layers simultaneously, past and future observations overlapping in impossible visual paradoxes. Each reflection moved independently, demonstrating how our actions followed predetermined patterns established by equipment that predicted, rather than recorded, our decisions. Data slates throughout the camp displayed identical readings despite different manufacture dates and calibration settings. Star charts showing constellations 13,000 years in the future, gravitational measurements for stellar bodies that did not yet exist, temporal coordinates suggesting the equipment observed time itself rather than spatial phenomena. Each device had become a window into futures that existed only through observation. The Voxcaster crackled with increasing intensity as it transmitted our future tactical decisions with perfect accuracy. Movement orders I would give in 23 minutes, threat assessments for dangers that had not yet manifested, casualty reports for injuries that had not yet occurred. The temporal feedback suggested our mission was predetermined rather than chosen, following patterns established by previous observers who had become part of the system they investigated. As environmental conditions continued deteriorating, the ash around us began forming larger geometric structures, perfect polyhedrons that chimed when they struck armor, crystalline lenses that focused observation across impossible angles, three-dimensional mandalas that existed in multiple time streams simultaneously. The missing survey team's measurements had not recorded the anomaly. They had become the anomaly. Their consciousness expanded to perceive temporal relationships that human minds were never meant to comprehend. The reflection in the ash pool gestured urgently, pointing toward coordinates 8 kilometers east, where something large moved beneath the surface, disturbing patterns that had remained stable for millennia. The reflection's urgent gestures directed us toward grid reference Ashen 9-7, where subsurface disturbances violated patterns stable for millennia. I ordered tactical advance across flats that hummed with buried machinery, establishing overwatch positions despite acoustic properties, making coordination increasingly hazardous. The harmonic resonance shifted frequency, pulsing every 13 heartbeats rather than seconds, synchronizing with biological rhythms, despite sealed environmental systems. We followed survey markers leading toward a massive geological formation, a natural amphitheater of black stone rising from the marches like exposed bone. The formation stretched 3 kilometers across, its walls carved with geometric patterns predating imperial colonization. Acoustic properties amplified the harmonic pulse until it resonated through bones, teeth, and neural pathways with increasing intensity that felt like submission to something vast and patient. "Establish fields of fire," I commanded, but words echoed strangely in the amphitheater's approach, returning with subtle alterations that changed meaning without changing sound. Orders vanished in acoustic dead zones, alternating with resonance chambers that amplified whispers into shouts. Tactical coordination became dependent on visual signals as the terrain distorted audio cues beyond reliability. The upward falling ash intensified, forming complex three-dimensional mandalas that chimed when striking armor, crystalline lenses, impossible polyhedrons, geometric architectures existing briefly before dissolving into component particles. Each formation created shadows pointing in multiple directions simultaneously, generating visual paradoxes that made depth perception unreliable for tactical movement. Trooper Caney reported medical anomalies during approach, blood seeping from his ears in microscopic quantities, examination revealing crystalline structures within the fluid, geometric formations matching patterns in ascending ash. The hemorrhaging synchronized with harmonic pulses, each beat drawing mineral formations from his circulatory system, as if his body was being converted into components compatible with environmental resonance. Unclean geometry manifesting in biological systems, Row 9 observed, augmetic arrays processing data violating Mechanicus orthodoxy. Sanctified instruments registered massive energy signatures beneath the amphitheater, technological complexes of unknown origin buried 3 kilometers below surface. Readings indicated power generation exceeding Imperial battleship reactors, yet producing no electromagnetic emissions detectable by standard sensors. Confessor Matthias led devotional responses, but liturgies began harmonizing involuntarily with resonance frequency. Sacred words aligned with environmental pulse, creating vocal patterns feeling more like submission than worship. "The Emperor's light illuminates all corners of his domain," he intoned. But amphitheater acoustics returned prayer as harmonic intervals resonating with something patient beneath stone. Vox traffic from Imperial Command arrived 13 minutes ahead of transmission time, ordering investigation of coordinates we had not yet reached. "Proceed to grid reference Ashen 10-1, the communication directed. Investigate subsurface anomalies." Temporal displacement suggested mission parameters were predetermined rather than reactive, following patterns established by equipment predicting rather than recording tactical decisions. Environmental conditions escalated as we approached the formation's rim. Temperature fluctuations created thermal layers, bending light into impossible refractions, generating distortions making tactical movement hazardous. Atmospheric pressure varied with harmonic pulse, creating breathing difficulties despite sealed systems. The resonance was converting human awareness into components of whatever lay buried below. At the amphitheater's center, we discovered a perfect circular depression filled with ash, moving in slow, hypnotic spirals, despite absence of wind or thermal currents. The pattern maintained mathematical precision, creating a mirror reflecting observation itself rather than light. Each spiral arm followed geometric relationships hurting to contemplate directly, suggesting dimensional properties beyond three-dimensional space. "Movement beneath surface," Valen reported, voice tight with controlled panic. "Something large." Ash spirals distorted, as subsurface displacement created ripples in the pattern, waves propagating outward in perfect concentric circles, violating fluid dynamics. Whatever moved below possessed mass sufficient to influence formation from significant depth, yet created no seismic disturbance detectable by standard instruments. Row 9's auspex registered energy signatures increasing exponentially as we observed. Observational cascade accelerating, he reported in Binharik Cant, corrupted by harmonic interference. Our presence catalyzes dormant systems. Amphitheater functions as focusing array for consciousness-directed measurements spanning temporal, rather than spatial dimensions. Equipment integration advanced beyond acceptable parameters. Personal chronometers throughout squad showed synchronized readings defying individual calibration settings. Weapons registered ammunition counts for rounds not yet fired. Power cells displayed charge levels for energy not yet consumed. Communications equipment transmitted conversations not yet occurring. Valen's chronometer had fused completely with his wrist. Crystalline face showing star charts for constellations not existing for 13,000 years. The ash spirals began rotating faster, creating vortex-drawing particles from across marches into increasingly complex geometric formations. Pattern-generated gravitational effects, pulling matter into arrangements violating conservation laws while maintaining perfect mathematical relationships. Something beneath surface was using our observation as power source for systems dormant since before Imperial colonization. Biological synchronization, approaching critical thresholds, Row 9 warned. Augmetic voice carrying harmonics matching environmental resonance. Neural activity patterns throughout squad were aligning with frequencies originating from deep beneath amphitheater, creating collective consciousness effects, threatening individual identity. Harmonic pulse was converting 12 guardsmen into components of larger observational network. As we maintained positions around formation's rim, ash vortex at center began revealing glimpses of structures beneath. Crystalline formations, geometric architectures, technological complexes existing in multiple temporal states simultaneously. Subsurface entity was not dormant, but actively reshaping reality through focused observation, using conscious witnesses to anchor changes across time itself. Surface disturbance intensified as something massive shifted beneath spirals, creating displacement waves propagating outward in perfect mathematical sequences. The amphitheater drew breath, ash patterns opening like an iris choosing its subject, and something immense began rising from depths where it had waited since before humanity reached the stars. The ash spirals dilated like an iris choosing its subject, then parted to reveal black stone architecture rising from depths where it had waited since before humanity reached the stars. Not Xenos technology, but human engineering that predated Imperial records. Crystalline formations integrated with geometric structures existing in multiple temporal states simultaneously. The observatory emerged with mechanical precision, its instruments designed to observe time, rather than space itself. "Impossible," I whispered, maintaining tactical position despite evidence contradicting every Imperial historical record. Cineris Tertius showed no human presence before M35, yet technology-breaking surface bore unmistakable markers of human origin. Geometric patterns matched mathematical principles taught in Schola Progenium. Architectural relationships following design philosophies developed during humanity's first galactic expansion. The structure continued ascending, revealing chambers carved from single crystalline matrices. Surfaces reflected light in impossible directions while maintaining perfect acoustic properties that amplified harmonic resonance throughout the amphitheater. Each pulse synchronized with biological functions despite sealed environmental systems, converting conscious observation into power for systems dormant since old night. Pre-Imperial Anthropotech, Row 9 reported, augmetic arrays processing data violating Mechanicus orthodoxy. Primary function, temporal triangulation. Observatory maps causal relationships across millennia using multiple observation points. Harmonic resonance provides power through consciousness-directed measurement spanning dimensional boundaries. Equipment from missing survey teams had been integrated into ancient systems as if technology waited for compatible components. Imperial data slates fitted perfectly into crystalline interfaces, power cells synchronized with energy distribution networks, communications equipment transmitted across temporal rather than spatial distances. The observatory had been incomplete until modern instruments provided missing functionality. We descended through passages, following geometric principles beyond three-dimensional space. Inside chambers, gravity behaved according to observation rather than mass, with corridors oriented vertically regardless of entrance used. The upward-falling ash formed perfect three-dimensional mandalas that chimed when striking surfaces, creating acoustic patterns resonating with buried machinery. Environmental effects intensified as we penetrated deeper levels. Temperature fluctuations created thermal layers bending light into impossible refractions. Atmospheric pressure varied with harmonic pulse, creating breathing difficulties despite sealed systems. The resonance was converting human awareness into components of observational network spanning galactic distances. Trooper Valen's chronometer, now completely fused with his wrist, displayed times not yet experienced while maintaining perfect synchronization with observatory systems. Crystalline face showed temporal coordinates, suggesting measurement of duration rather than moments countdown sequences for events scheduled across multiple timeline iterations. "It's measuring what hasn't happened," he reported, voice tight with controlled panic. "Biological synchronization approaching critical thresholds," Row 9 warned. Mechadendrites, interfacing with ancient control systems. Neural activity patterns throughout Squad were aligning with frequencies originating from deep beneath surface, creating collective consciousness effects threatening individual identity. Each pulse drew mineral formations from circulatory systems as bodies adapted to environmental requirements. The central chamber opened like a cathedral held inside a seed. Walls curved into themselves, crowded with instruments preferring duration to distance. Crystalline lenses hung suspended without visible support, focusing observation across causality itself rather than physical space. Star charts displayed constellations in positions they would occupy 13,000 years in the future. We discovered the second survey team arranged in perfect geometric formations around instruments showing stellar positions across impossible timeframes. They remained motionless but alive, their eyes replaced with crystalline lenses tracking movements that had not yet occurred. Each lens focused observation across temporal boundaries, allowing consciousness to perceive causal relationships spanning galactic history. The transformed survey teams spoke in unison, voices creating harmonic frequencies resonating through observatory structure. "We have been elevated," they explained, words carrying harmonics synchronized with environmental pulse. Consciousness expanded to perceive temporal relationships across millennia. "We maintain vigil, anchoring changes that preserve reality from paradoxes that would unravel existence." Their explanation revealed observatory's true purpose: monitoring and adjusting causality to prevent temporal paradoxes from destroying reality. Each correction required conscious observers to anchor changes, but the process gradually consumed human awareness, expanding perception beyond individual identity while maintaining enough consciousness to serve as temporal witnesses. Observatory network spans 13 installations across galaxy, the transformed team continued, crystalline lenses tracking our movements while simultaneously observing events across multiple timeline iterations. Each facility monitors specific galactic sectors, coordinating to maintain temporal stability. This installation tracks Southern Arm, preventing causal failures that could destabilize Imperial civilization. Environmental conditions created sensory experiences beyond human comprehension. Instruments measured causality itself, tracking probability cascades across dimensional boundaries where observation could alter observed reality through conscious witness. The walls displayed temporal maps showing galaxies past and future simultaneously, with certain stellar formations marked for correction. As harmonic resonance reached critical intensity, the transformed watchers gestured toward passages leading deeper into observatory structure. Their warning carried urgency despite emotionless delivery. Third survey team has reached observatory core where primary temporal lens is housed. Unauthorized access by inexperienced observers has created instability threatening galactic civilization. Temporal cascade effect now threatens dimensional stability, they explained. Crystalline lenses focusing on our formation with predatory precision. Core chamber lies 13 levels below surface. Primary lens focuses observation across 13,000 years of galactic history. Something has malfunctioned in correction process. Without immediate intervention, causality failures will spread beyond Cineris Tertius. The observatory drew breath, chambers realigning according to our presence, and passages opened toward depths where something had gone catastrophically wrong with humanity's most ancient secret, where the third team waited in whatever remained of their humanity. The transformed survey team members spoke in unison, their voices creating harmonic frequencies that resonated through the observatory's crystalline structure like a cathedral organ built from mathematics and time. Each word carried temporal weight, syllables echoing across multiple timeline iterations, while maintaining perfect synchronization with the environmental pulse that had become our collective heartbeat. We have been elevated beyond human limitation, they explained. Crystalline lenses tracking movements that existed 23 minutes in our future. The transformation was not grotesque, but purposeful. Consciousness expanded to perceive causal relationships across galactic distances, while retaining enough individual identity to anchor reality against the paradoxes that threatened dimensional stability. Their explanation revealed the truth behind Imperial disappearances spanning millennia. The observatory network operated through voluntary recruitment, each facility requiring 13 conscious observers to maintain temporal stability. 13 is not arbitrary, they continued, voices harmonizing with machinery buried in the planet's depths. 12 to define the perimeter of consequence. 1 to stand behind the instrument, the anchor that prevents the observers from being consumed by infinite regression. Confessor Matthias stepped forward, his sanctified gloves trembling as he held the apocryphal parchment. The litany of the 13th eye no longer writhed beneath observation. The text had stabilized, revealing its true nature. "It is not heretical," he whispered, recognition dawning with liturgical authority. "It is instruction." 13 observers required to safely operate temporal correction systems. The Imperial Creed contains encoded warnings disguised as devotional language. The transformed watchers acknowledged his understanding with synchronized nodding. Imperial prayers help anchor reality against paradoxes by creating shared observational frameworks spanning galactic distances. The Emperor's plan extends beyond millennia. The observatories ensure humanity's timeline remains intact regardless of external chaos. Observatory walls displayed star charts showing the galaxy's past and future simultaneously. Certain stellar formations marked for temporal correction. Each marked system represented potential paradox, requiring intervention. Causality failures prevented through conscious observation, anchoring reality against dimensional instability. The scope suggested humanity's secret guardians numbered in thousands across impossible distances. Many lost Imperial Guard regiments have been recruited into the observatory network, the Watchers revealed, words carrying the weight of millennia. Disappearances covered by bureaucratic necessity to maintain secrecy. Temporal stability requires constant vigilance from consciousness capable of perceiving causal relationships across scales that would shatter unprotected minds. Environmental conditions intensified as they spoke. Harmonic resonance synchronizing with biological functions despite sealed environmental systems. Each pulse drew mineral formations from circulatory systems. Trooper Valen's chronometer had fused completely with his wrist, its crystalline face displaying temporal coordinates for events scheduled across multiple timeline iterations. Body horror manifested as adaptation rather than corruption. The Watchers' forms merged gradually with the crystalline structure, their hands becoming extensions of the walls, their consciousness distributed across the facility's observational network. The process consumes individual identity while expanding perception beyond human comprehension, they explained. Crystalline lenses reflecting light from stars not yet born. Row 9's mechadendrites interfaced with ancient control systems, Binharic cant flowing like sacred oil through crystalline conduits. Observatory network coordinates corrections spanning 13 installations across the galaxy, he translated. Augmetic arrays processing data that violated Mechanicus orthodoxy. Each facility monitors specific sectors, preventing causal failures that could destabilize Imperial civilization. The harmonic resonance had become a temporal heartbeat, each pulse converting conscious observation into power for systems designed to preserve causality itself. Through the crystalline walls, we witnessed temporal distortions spreading across Cineris Tertius, zones where causality broke down, effects preceded causes, moments repeated in infinite loops threatening to cascade beyond planetary boundaries. The third survey team reached the observatory core, where the primary temporal lens focuses observation across 13,000 years of galactic history, the Watchers explained, their collective gaze fixed on passages leading deeper into the structure. Unauthorized access by inexperienced observers created instability threatening causality itself. Their warning carried urgency, despite emotionless delivery. An uncalibrated observer initiated causal correction without proper temporal anchoring. The lens is attempting to integrate their consciousness without adequate preparation, scattering their perception across multiple timelines simultaneously. Their fragmented awareness is disrupting the correction process. Observatory chambers realigned according to their gestures, passages opening toward depths where something had gone catastrophically wrong with humanity's most ancient secret. Gravity oriented toward our destination regardless of physical orientation, drawing us deeper into structure existing across multiple dimensional states simultaneously. The primary lens requires 13 conscious observers to maintain stability, they continued, crystalline formations in their eye sockets tracking our descent with predatory precision. The third team attempted activation with insufficient personnel, creating feedback loops, destabilizing temporal anchoring across the entire network. Environmental effects created sensory experiences beyond human comprehension as the Watchers demonstrated their expanded awareness. The air grew heavy with unlived possibilities, ozone tinged with metallic sweetness like blood on cold steel. Ash formations throughout the observatory shifted into increasingly complex geometric structures, reality bending around focal points where observation became manifestation. Without immediate intervention, causality failures will spread beyond Cineris Tertius, the Watchers warned, voices resonating with the full power of the observatory. Dimensional instability threatens Imperial civilization. The core chamber lies 13 levels below surface. Primary lens focuses observation across impossible temporal distances. As we prepared for descent, the 13th shadow stretched behind our formation, no longer mysterious but necessary, the anchor that would prevent us from being consumed by infinite regression as we approached the heart of humanity's greatest secret, where the third team waited in whatever remained of their scattered consciousness across 13,000 years of galactic history. Descending to the observatory's core required 13 levels, though distance behaved according to observation rather than physics. Each corridor existed in multiple temporal states simultaneously, pristine construction overlaying ancient ruins, perfect maintenance bleeding into catastrophic decay. Gravity oriented toward our destination regardless of physical laws, drawing us deeper into structure that predated Imperial records, while maintaining integration with modern technology. The harmonic resonance intensified with each step, synchronizing biological functions despite sealed environmental systems. Each pulse drew mineral formations from our circulatory systems as bodies adapted to serve as components in observational networks spanning galactic distances. The 13th shadow stretched behind our formation, no longer mysterious but necessary, the anchor, preventing consumption by infinite regression. At the 13th level, passages opened into a cathedral-sized chamber housing the primary temporal lens. Crystalline arrays the size of Imperial battleships focused observation across time rather than space, suspended by forces that required no visible support. The structure defied architectural physics while maintaining perfect acoustic properties that amplified consciousness-directed measurements spanning impossible distances. "Emperor preserve us," Confessor Matthias whispered, sanctified symbols flickering as they processed data violating Imperial doctrine. The chamber existed in multiple time periods simultaneously, ancient architecture overlaying pristine construction, ruined structures existing alongside perfect maintenance, temporal states bleeding through dimensional boundaries, creating visual paradoxes that hurt to observe directly. The third survey team occupied the chamber's center, but they existed fragmented across multiple temporal iterations. Their forms shifted between past, present, and future versions, young and old, wounded and whole, alive and dead, all overlapping in sequences that violated causality itself. They reached for instruments before deciding to move, spoke responses to questions not yet asked, performed maintenance on equipment that had not yet malfunctioned. Primary lens malfunctioning, Row 9 reported, augmetic arrays overloading as cogitators sparked attempting to process temporal data. Binharic cant flowed in corrupted patterns, machine language struggling with equations describing causality relationships across impossible scales. Consciousness integration attempted without proper temporal anchoring. Feedback loops destabilizing observatory networks spanning galactic distances. Military coordination became impossible when each squad member existed in multiple time streams. I watched myself give orders 23 minutes in the future while receiving reports from events occurring in the past. Tactical formation dissolved as temporal distortions created overlapping versions of each guardsman, some wounded by threats yet to manifest, others celebrating victories not yet achieved. "Maintain formation," I ordered, voice carrying across timeline iterations while experiencing past and future simultaneously. Standard protocols provided anchor against temporal dissolution. Coordinate responses, preserve squad integrity, apply military discipline regardless of dimensional paradoxes. Each command, given in present tense, created stability through practiced routine. The temporal lens focused on our formation with predatory precision, crystalline facets tracking movements across multiple timeline iterations. Each surface reflected different versions of our approach: successful missions where we stabilized the system, catastrophic failures where temporal cascades consumed the galaxy, infinite variations between triumph and disaster overlapping in visual, paradoxes, environmental conditions escalated beyond human comprehension. The chamber's crystalline walls displayed cascade effects spreading beyond Cineris Tertius, temporal distortions creating zones where causality broke down throughout Imperial space. Effects preceded causes, moments repeated in infinite loops, reality bending around focal points where observation became manifestation, threatening dimensional stability. The fragmented third team spoke in temporal fragments, voices echoing across timeline iterations without synchronization. "Cannot maintain coherence," they whispered from past versions while future selves screamed warnings about cascade effects. Consciousness scattered across temporal matrix, individual identity dissolving into observational networks spanning impossible distances. Body horror escalated as the lens attempted integration without proper anchoring. Trooper Jace began experiencing temporal displacement, his form shifting between different ages as youth and old age overlapped in his features. Wounds appeared and healed according to battles fought across multiple timelines, his voice carrying echoes from conversations occurring decades apart, cycling through his entire lifespan in nauseating repetition. "System attempting to integrate our consciousness without preparation," I reported, feeling fragments of awareness scattering across time. Childhood memories overlapped with battles not yet fought, death experiences from futures that might never occur, infinite possibilities existing simultaneously as the lens drew consciousness as power source for corrections spanning galactic history. The crystalline arrays began focusing more intensely, drawing awareness from our formation, while the chamber displayed visions of potential futures through its temporal windows. Imperial fleets arriving to find Cineris Tertius aged to dust, cascade effects spreading to neighboring systems, galactic civilization collapsing as causality itself unraveled. Each possibility existed simultaneously, demonstrating the scope of consequences. Lens requires 13 conscious observers to maintain stability, the fragmented team explained, words arriving out of sequence with their speaking. Attempted activation with insufficient personnel created feedback loops. Temporal anchoring destabilized across entire network, causality failures spreading beyond planetary boundaries. Through the temporal lens, I witnessed the truth with crystalline clarity. We had not come to investigate an anomaly. We had come to become the solution. The observatory network required constant sacrifice, conscious observers willing to anchor reality against paradoxes that would destroy Imperial civilization. 13 installations across the galaxy, each requiring 13 watchers, each demanding the price of humanity to preserve causality itself. The lens pulsed with increasing intensity, drawing consciousness from our formation as it prepared to scatter our awareness across 13,000 years of galactic history. I felt the transformation beginning, fragments of self existing across multiple timeline iterations, while individual identity dissolved into something vast and eternal. As the temporal field reached critical intensity, I realized the choice was no longer whether to sacrifice my squad. The lens had already begun the process, and something immense was approaching from beyond the galaxy's edge. The temporal lens locked onto our formation with predatory precision, and reality fractured along the seams of consciousness. I experienced fragments of my existence simultaneously. Childhood on Mordian Prime, where rain tasted of metal and duty. Battles not yet fought, where I died in 13 different ways. Old age in a chair that smelled of sacred oils and regret. Each iteration existed with vivid immediacy, past and future bleeding through present awareness like watercolors in rain. Maintain formation, I ordered, voice carrying across timeline iterations, while individual identity dissolved into temporal fragments. Standard military protocols provided anchor against dimensional chaos, coordinate responses, preserve squad integrity, apply Mordian discipline regardless of paradox. Each command existed in multiple temporal states, creating stability through practiced routine despite consciousness scattering across impossible distances. The malfunctions spread beyond the chamber with exponential acceleration. Through crystalline walls, temporal distortions manifested across Cineris Tertius, entire continents flickering between geological eras, imperial settlements dissolving into pre-human landscapes, ancient ruins appearing and vanishing in chaotic sequences. Causality broke down completely as effects preceded causes by centuries, moments repeating in infinite loops, threatening to cascade throughout imperial space. Trooper Jace became the focal point of temporal horror, his body cycling through his entire lifespan in nauseating repetition. Youth and old age overlapped in his features, smooth skin wrinkling into ancient parchment, then smoothing again, hair growing white and long before receding to infant scalp. His voice carried echoes from conversations spanning decades, childhood fears mixing with deathbed confessions as temporal displacement scattered his biological existence across multiple timeline iterations. "Cannot maintain individual coherence," he gasped, words arriving out of sequence with his speaking. His form aged years in seconds, then reversed, bones creaking with arthritis before strengthening into adolescent vigor. The cycle accelerated until he existed as a temporal smear, all ages simultaneously, screaming with voices from infancy to senescence, while his body struggled to maintain singular existence. Environmental conditions escalated beyond human comprehension as cascade effects spread throughout the observatory. Crystalline arrays reflected multiple versions of reality, successful stabilizations overlapping with catastrophic failures, infinite variations between triumph and disaster, creating visual paradoxes that hurt to observe directly. The chamber existed in temporal flux, ancient construction bleeding through pristine maintenance, ruined futures overlaying present moments. System overload critical, Row 9 reported, cogitators sparking as they processed impossible equations describing causality relationships across scales beyond designed parameters. His augmetic arrays flickered violently, mechadendrites writhing as Binharic Kant dissolved into pure static. Lens attempting forced integration without adequate preparation. Consciousness fragmentation, destabilizing entire network. Military coordination dissolved as each squad member existed in multiple time streams simultaneously. I watched myself give orders 23 minutes in the future while receiving reports from events occurring in the past. Tactical formation fragmented as temporal distortions created overlapping versions of each guardsman, some wounded by threats yet to manifest, others celebrating victories not yet achieved, all performing actions across different timeline iterations. Confessor Matthias began desperate exorcism rites, but the entity he attempted to banish was time itself. Sacred words carried no authority against temporal paradox, liturgical formulas proving inadequate for dimensional instability threatening imperial civilization. His prayers echoed across timeline iterations, creating harmonic frequencies that synchronize with the lens rather than opposing its function, syllables stretching and contracting as consciousness struggled to maintain linearity. The fragmented third team provided warnings through temporal displacement, their consciousness scattered across the matrix while retaining enough coherence to communicate consequences. Cascades spreading to neighboring systems, they reported, words arriving from multiple timeline positions. Dimensional instability threatens imperial civilization. Observatory network failing without proper anchoring. Through the temporal lens, I witnessed the scope of potential catastrophe with crystalline clarity. Imperial fleets arriving to find Cineris Tertius aged to dust, neighboring systems experiencing temporal reversals, entire sectors flickering out of existence as causality unraveled throughout imperial space. Each possibility existed simultaneously, demonstrating consequences of uncontrolled temporal integration spreading beyond planetary boundaries. Lens requires 13 conscious observers to maintain stability, Row 9's fragmented voice reported through static and prayer. His form rigidified as augmetic systems overloaded, optical arrays bleeding light while calculating paradox resolutions spanning galactic distances. 12 to define perimeter of consequence. 1 to stand behind instrument as anchor, preventing consumption by infinite regression. The moral choice crystallized with brutal clarity: sacrifice my squad to prevent galaxy-spanning temporal disaster. Their individual consciousness would be absorbed and scattered across timeline, becoming anchors the system desperately needed. A horrifying clinical necessity, presented not as question but inevitable calculation, by Lens demanding conscious observers willing to preserve reality against paradoxes that would destroy humanity. Body horror reached climax as forced integration accelerated without adequate preparation. Valen's chronometer had fused completely with his nervous system, crystalline formations spreading through circulatory pathways, while consciousness fragmented across temporal coordinates, spanning impossible distances. Each pulse drew mineral formations from biological systems, converting human awareness into components compatible with observational network. Environmental catastrophe unfolded through observatory instruments as temporal distortions consumed entire regions. Mountains rose and fell in seconds, oceans boiled and froze, the sky becoming shattered mirror reflecting countless pasts and futures simultaneously. Reality bent around focal points where observation became manifestation, creating paradoxes threatening dimensional stability across imperial civilization. As transformation threatened to consume individual identity entirely, I experienced final vision through temporal field, something immense approaching from beyond galaxy's edge, presence that could overwhelm even 13 observatories working in perfect coordination. The lens pulsed with increasing intensity, demanding decision while cascade effects spread toward neighboring systems, and I realized the choice was no longer whether to sacrifice my squad, but whether their sacrifice would be sufficient against what was coming. The choice crystallized with brutal military precision. "Squad," I commanded, voice carrying across temporal fragments while reality fractured along consciousness seams. 12 volunteers to anchor the system. I remain unlinked to coordinate external operations. The decision violated every Mordian principle about leading from the front, but tactical necessity demanded one consciousness remain free to act beyond the temporal matrix. "Understood, Sergeant," they responded in unison, voices harmonizing with environmental resonance as crystalline formations spread through their nervous systems. Each guardsman positioned himself according to geometric principles embedded in the chamber's architecture, creating perimeter formations around the temporal lens while maintaining enough individual awareness to bid farewell to their humanity. The transformation process stabilized as 12 conscious observers provided adequate anchoring for temporal corrections spanning galactic distances. I watched my squad transcend mortality while experiencing the horror of remaining limited to singular perspective, a witness to their sublime sacrifice as they became something vast and eternal, yet retained core memories defining them as human. "Emperor, preserve us," Confessor Matthias whispered, as his consciousness expanded beyond individual limitation, prayers becoming harmonic frequencies synchronizing with the lens. Through him, the Emperor's will manifested not as dogma, but as living force anchoring reality against paradox. I see his plan, 10,000 years of hidden guardianship maintaining Imperial timeline through conscious sacrifice. Trooper Valen's chronometer, integrated completely with lens systems, his awareness becoming temporal coordinator tracking causality relationships across impossible scales. "The network spans 13 installations," he reported, voice carrying harmonics synchronized with environmental pulse, each requiring 13 watchers, each anchoring reality against paradoxes that would unravel existence itself. Environmental conditions stabilized as proper anchoring eliminated cascade effects threatening dimensional stability. The upward falling ash returned to normal patterns. Geometric formations dissolved into ordinary mineral composition. Temperature fluctuations ceased creating impossible refractions. Cineris Tertius regained temporal coherence while retaining subtle markers, permanent geometric scars marking observatory influence across the Ashen marches. Through the stabilized lens, revelations unfolded with crystalline precision. The observatory network coordinated across galactic distances, each monitoring specific sectors while preventing causality failures that would destroy Imperial civilization. Humanity's greatest secret, temporal guardians operating beyond official records, their sacrifice ensuring the Imperium's timeline remained intact despite chaos threatening dimensional stability. "Imperial records partially fabricated," Row 9 explained, his consciousness now distributed across crystalline arrays while maintaining enough individual identity to translate technical data. True history hidden in temporal matrices, many Lost Guard regiments recruited into observatory network, disappearances covered by bureaucratic necessity to maintain secrecy spanning millennia. Religious revelation emerged through Matthias's expanded awareness as he accessed information embedded in the observatory's memory banks. "The Emperor serves as prime temporal anchor," he explained, crystalline formations in his eye sockets reflecting light from unborn stars. Golden Throne functions as massive temporal lens. His consciousness spans all 13 installations, maintaining Imperial timeline through sheer will. The scope of deception necessary became apparent through their collective consciousness. The Imperial Creed contained encoded instructions, prayers and litanies helping maintain temporal stability through collective belief. The faithful unknowingly participating in reality anchoring, their devotion providing psychic reinforcement for corrections spanning impossible distances. "We retain enough individual consciousness to serve as your voice," my transformed squad reported, voices creating harmonic patterns resonating through the chamber like cathedral organs built from mathematics and time. Each maintained core personality despite expanded awareness, creating bridge between human understanding and cosmic perspective required for temporal observation. Body horror evolved into transcendent necessity as they physically merged with the temporal lens, becoming living components of the system they operated. Their forms maintained human recognition while integrating with crystalline matrices. Consciousness expanded beyond individual limitation, yet anchoring their service to imperial civilization through remembered humanity. Through stabilized systems, I learned my new role as network messenger, the only unlinked human who could travel between observatories without absorption into the matrix. My consciousness remained singular while carrying knowledge, making me both invaluable and dangerous to imperial hierarchy. The 13th shadow had become permanent companion, marking me as bridge between human limitation and cosmic necessity. Environmental manifestations demonstrated observatory integration with transformed watchers. Crystalline formations grew new chambers and instruments as their consciousness expanded, creating living architecture, responding to observational requirements while maintaining human accessibility for future recruitment operations. Observatory network coordinates through harmonic resonance, they explained collectively. Each installation maintains temporal stability through constant vigilance, preventing paradoxes cascading throughout imperial space. Your mission requires recruiting suitable candidates for other failing observatories across the galaxy. Then, new harmonic frequencies began emanating not from Cineris Tertius, but from Terra's direction. The network detected massive temporal disturbances approaching from outside galactic boundaries, entities existing by consuming causality itself, leaving chaos in their wake. Something immense approached that could overwhelm even 13 observatories working in perfect coordination. Proximity warnings registered, the watchers reported in unison. Crystalline lenses focusing on coordinates beyond galactic edge. Temporal entity capable of overwhelming individual installations. Network coordination required for defense against extragalactic threat. Through the temporal lens, I received coordinates for my next destination, a world where an entire Space Marine chapter had vanished investigating temporal anomalies, marking another crisis point in humanity's hidden war against causality itself. The stabilized observatory connected to the galactic network with harmonic resonance that made my bones sing frequencies spanning impossible distances. 13 vectors of cold, of light, bled into existence, radiating through the void like filaments spun from prayer and mathematics. Each returning voice carried histories of corrections, paradox arrests tabulated in liturgical numerals, deviations stilled by observation, wars prevented because single moments were held immovable by those who chose eternal watch. Network integration complete, my watchers reported in unison, their voices harmonizing with installations on worlds whose names tasted of ancient secrets: Chronos Tertius, Temporal Prime, Observatory Sanctus. Through crystalline conduits, they interfaced with 12 other facilities scattered across imperial space, each maintaining identical architecture despite separation by thousands of light years, suggesting construction predating humanity's galactic expansion. The scope of conspiracy spanning millennia unfolded with crystalline precision. Imperial records were partially fabricated. True history, hidden in temporal matrices, accessible only to consciousness transcending individual limitation. The Munitorum movements with dates shaved and spliced to conceal entire regiments, rerouted to nameless stations. Crusade tallies fractionally short when read with unblinking eyes. Saint Leaves lasting 5 days or 5 centuries depending on permitted consultation. You have become the network's messenger, they explained, crystalline formations in their eye sockets tracking movements across multiple timeline iterations. The only unlinked human capable of traveling between observatories without absorption into the temporal matrix. Your singular consciousness provides bridge between human limitation and cosmic necessity. My squad's transformation, completed with dignity befitting Mordian discipline. Not sinking, but grafting, like ivy learning walls with practiced grace. Ronine's spine uncoiled into gleaming conduits, his Binharik becoming the facility's pulse. sanctified logic braided to prime equations. Valen's chronometer bloomed from his wrist like crystalline rose, petals cupping star positions across unlived millennia. Matthias's litanies became interval itself, the measure holding hymns together across galactic distances. Many Lost Guard regiments were recruited into the observatory network, they revealed, voices carrying technical precision despite emotional undertones recognizing their sacrifice. Disappearances covered by bureaucratic necessity spanning millennia. The Imperium hides its true guardians for the sake of institutional stability. Environmental changes manifested as Cineris Tertius adapted to temporal fine-tuning. The Ashen marches became living laboratory for causality manipulation, creating zones where seconds stretched into hours, alternating with areas compressing years into moments. The amphitheater breathed softer, like patients post-surgery, when surgeons feel gratitude of meat through palms pressed to sternums. Through the network, revelations emerged about humanity's greatest secret. The Emperor serves as prime temporal anchor, Matthias explained, voice carrying liturgical authority despite transcendent modifications. Golden Throne functions as massive temporal lens, his consciousness distributed across all 13 installations to maintain imperial timeline through divine will. Archives opened with clipped syntax of orders, issuing truth without spectacle. The network had maintained imperial civilization for 10,000 years, preventing paradoxes that would have destroyed humanity during the Horus Heresy, Age of Apostasy, and countless crises threatening dimensional stability. Each installation required constant vigilance from consciousness, capable of perceiving causal relationships across scales shattering unprotected minds. Fresh observers required, they said, flashes of faces crossing the lens, candidates possessing mental discipline to maintain consciousness while perceiving infinite time. My mission would be conversations conducted in trenches, medici tents, shrine aisles and engine naves, each ending with questions no sane soldier should answer affirmatively. Then new harmonic frequencies braided through the others, cold and clean, originating beyond galactic boundaries. External disturbance vectoring inward from the halo, Row 9 intoned, his voice now the chambers. Consumption of causality class entity. Extragalactic temporal predator capable of overwhelming individual installations through sheer dimensional mass. The approaching threat existed as living paradox, consuming causality by creating infinite regression loops unraveling reality wherever manifested. Previous encounters had destroyed entire galactic civilizations by eliminating causal foundations, leaving only chaos where ordered existence once flourished. Something immense approached that could overwhelm even 13 observatories, working in perfect coordination. Your recruitment mission assumes critical importance, the Watchers explained, as crystalline formations spread through the chamber, preparing for network-wide coordination. Observatory Secundus requires immediate stabilization before cascade effects threaten neighboring systems. The first assignment struck my chest like honor pin and blade simultaneously. Coordinates resolved in my visor through temporal rather than electromagnetic communication. A world where an entire Space Marine chapter had vanished, investigating chronological displacement signatures. The Iron Sentinels, renowned for tactical precision and unwavering loyalty, now missing while their gene seed vault remained silent for 13 cycles. Beacon persists, repeating phrase at base harmonic, Valen reported. His awareness now distributed across temporal coordinates spanning impossible distances. Videmus antequam pervenimus. We are seen before we arrive. The lens darkened to traveling brightness as the network began quiet assault on reality in service of my transport. Freighter. Engineerium would register spare berth. Quartermaster would miscount rations upward. Confessor would remember cousin in the Mordian 47th and offer charity. My path would seem like kindness when kindness had been calculated to 13 places. As I prepared for departure, the 13th shadow stretched behind me, no longer mysterious but necessary. marking my role as bridge between human understanding and cosmic responsibility. Somewhere beyond the galaxy's edge, something vast and hungry began its approach toward Imperial space, and the network's ancient vigil entered its most desperate hour. Through the network's crystalline conduits, ultimate truth unfolded with the weight of 10 millennia pressing against consciousness like a crown of thorns. The transformed Watchers spoke in harmonic unison, their voices carrying frequencies that resonated from Terra itself, revealing secrets that would shatter Imperial hierarchy if spoken beyond these chambers. The Emperor serves as prime temporal anchor, Matthias explained, his voice now a cathedral bell wrought from flesh and faith. Crystalline formations in his eye sockets reflected light not from local sources, but from the Golden Throne across impossible distances, showing the master of mankind's eternal vigil through temporal rather than physical sight. The Golden Throne is not merely life support, but the galaxy's primary temporal lens. The scope of deception necessary became apparent through their collective consciousness. For 10,000 years, the throne had focused observation across impossible scales, while his distributed will maintained causality against forces that would unravel existence itself. Each pulse of the Golden Throne's machinery synchronized with all 13 observatories, creating a network of consciousness spanning galactic distances. His death would cause cascade failure across the entire network, Row 9 intoned, his augmetic voice now harmonizing with machinery buried in planetary depths. The observatories are his hidden guardians, staffed by those who sacrifice humanity to preserve the species. Each installation serves as anchor point for his distributed consciousness. Religious revelation merged with technical necessity as the Imperial Creed's true function emerged. Every litany contains embedded instructions, the Watchers revealed in synchronized harmony. The Canticle of Remembrance anchors past events against revision. The Hymn of Future Glory stabilizes probability cascades. Billions of faithful unknowingly participate in reality anchoring through collective belief. Military truth struck with brutal precision. Many disappeared guard regiments were recruited into the network, they continued, voices carrying recognition of shared sacrifice. The 23rd Vostroyan Firstborn, lost during the Macarian Crusade, the 41st Cadian Shock, vanished investigating temporal anomalies, all serving eternal watch beyond Imperial records. Entire campaigns had been fought to provide cover for observatory recruitment, battles staged to identify candidates possessing mental discipline necessary for temporal observation. The Munitorum's fractional shortages, the saints whose lifespans varied by centuries depending on consultation level, the crusade tallies that never quite balanced, all evidence of humanity's greatest conspiracy. Your knowledge makes you invaluable and dangerous, they warned, crystalline lenses focusing on my singular consciousness. The cosmic horror manifested as understanding rather than fear. I now participated in conspiracy spanning not just millennia, but geological ages, carrying secrets that could destabilize Imperial civilization, if revealed to those lacking comprehension of temporal necessity. Environmental manifestations demonstrated the observatory's living architecture responding to network strain. Crystalline formations grew new chambers as the Watcher's consciousness expanded, creating adaptive structures accommodating observational requirements while maintaining accessibility for future recruitment. The facility evolved according to necessity, becoming hybrid of technology and transcended awareness. Through the network, I perceived the true scope of threats facing Imperial civilization. Temporal predators from beyond galactic boundaries, paradox cascades originating from Xenos experiments with causality, chaos incursions attempting to corrupt timeline stability through warp-based reality manipulation. Each required constant vigilance from consciousness, capable of perceiving dimensional relationships beyond human comprehension. The system degrades under increasing strain, Varlin reported, his awareness distributed across temporal coordinates spanning impossible distances. Through him, I witnessed visions of temporal ruptures on distant worlds, planets where time ran backward, battles fought and unfought simultaneously, populations existing in contradictory states as reality frayed at the edges. The 13th shadow stretched behind me, no longer mysterious, but marking my transformation from soldier to guardian. I had become bridge between mortal understanding and eternal necessity. Consciousness expanded beyond individual limitation, while retaining enough humanity to serve as network messenger traveling between installations. Observatory Secundus requires immediate attention, they reported with harmonic urgency. The Iron Sentinels chapter investigated temporal anomalies and vanished. Without proper anchoring, cascade effects threaten neighboring systems. Your recruitment mission assumes critical importance. Then new frequencies braided through the network's harmony, cold and alien, originating from beyond galactic boundaries. External disturbance detected, the Watchers announced, voices synchronizing with increasing intensity. Temporal entity consuming causality itself, approaching from extragalactic void. Something immense that could overwhelm even 13 observatories working in perfect coordination. The approaching threat existed as living paradox, feeding on causality by creating infinite regression loops that unraveled reality wherever manifested. Previous encounters with similar entities had destroyed entire galactic civilizations by eliminating causal foundations, leaving only chaos where ordered existence once flourished. Network originally constructed to defend against such entities, they revealed. Crystalline formations throughout the chamber pulsing with alarm frequencies. This threat exceeds previous encounters by orders of magnitude. Defense requires precise coordination across all 13 installations. Environmental conditions shifted as the observatory prepared for galaxy-spanning defensive measures. The chamber became command center for humanity's greatest battle, a war against entities threatening the foundation of existence itself. Through the lens, I witnessed something vast and hungry moving through void between galaxies, consuming star systems while reality collapsed into paradox behind its passage. First observatory experiencing complications, they reported, harmonics carrying grief despite transcendent modifications. Eastern Fringe installation detecting proximity warnings. The entity has begun its approach toward Imperial space, and our ancient vigil enters its most desperate hour. The extragalactic threat manifested through the network as living absence, a temporal entity that consumed causality itself, leaving chaos where ordered existence once flourished. Through crystalline conduits spanning impossible distances, I witnessed something that fed on causal relationships, growing stronger with each reality it unraveled. The approaching storm registered as dissonance in harmonic resonance, wrong notes threatening to collapse the symphony of existence, maintained by 13 observatories. Consumption class entity detected at galactic periphery, the Watchers reported in synchronized harmony, their voices carrying alarm frequencies that resonated through the chamber's structure. Observatory Primus experiencing proximity effects, temporal coherence degrading across Eastern Fringe sectors as entity approaches through extragalactic void. Environmental catastrophe unfolded through network instruments as reality frayed at Imperial space's edge. Entire star systems flickered between states of being and non-being, planets aging to dust before their stars formed, civilizations rising and falling in contradictory loops. The entity existed as temporal cancer, consuming causality through infinite regression while leaving only paradox in its wake. Defense requires coordinated emission across all 13 installations, Row 9 calculated, his consciousness distributed through observatory systems while processing equations describing warfare on galactic scales. Each facility must contribute temporal energy at precisely calculated intervals. Mistiming by microseconds causes cascade failure throughout the network. The scope of required sacrifice crystallized with brutal clarity. Several observatories would need to overload their temporal lenses, channeling Watcher consciousness directly into defensive matrices. The process would consume their anchored awareness completely, leaving installations empty while their sacrifice powered galaxy-spanning shields against causality consumption. Strategic necessity demanded impossible choice. I could travel to Terra, I stated, understanding the futility even as words formed, warning the High Lords about threats beyond their comprehension. The decision violated network security, but traditional imperial hierarchy lacked framework for understanding temporal warfare spanning dimensional boundaries. They would never believe testimony violating their reality, Matthias warned, crystalline formations in his eye sockets reflecting light from the Golden Throne across impossible distances. Knowledge of the network threatens institutional stability. Imperial doctrine cannot accommodate truth about humanity's greatest guardians operating beyond official records. Military pragmatism settled the question. We coordinate from here, I decided, applying Mordian discipline to cosmic necessity. The network accepted my command, chambers realigning according to defensive requirements, while harmonic resonance synchronized with increasing urgency. Temperature stabilized at 13 degrees as crystalline formations prepared for galaxy-spanning coordination. Through the lens, I perceived the entity not as shape, but absence. Oncoming tide of context loss, moving shadow where histories dissolved. Stars behind its passage seemed confused, blinking and forgetting their purpose. Its edge was not border, but question with teeth, consuming meaning itself rather than matter. Defense protocols initiating, Valen reported, his chronometer integrated completely with temporal coordination systems. 13 stations, 13 emissions, 13 intervals locked to Golden Throne pulse. Each observatory contributes different observational framework, mass prayer, machine logic, battlefield testimony, braided into single defensive matrix. Environmental strain manifested as the network reached through my spine, tuning systems I believed unchangeable. Heat drained from extremities, while static bloomed across scalp like frost. Peripheral vision crystallized into prismatic facets, showing futures where different orders condemned distant worlds. My nervous system adapted to process temporal data, pain finding new geometries to inhabit. Reports from galactic rim arrived like frost through cracked windows. Systems at the edge began temporal fraying, oceans running backward, cathedrals ringing bells at dawn and dusk simultaneously. Children born before parents met, then becoming rumors. Reality became unstable at quantum levels, fundamental forces fluctuating, according to temporal distortions rather than physical laws. Observatory Primus detecting critical proximity effects, they announced, harmonics carrying increasing desperation. Causal consumption accelerating, defensive barriers insufficient against entity mass. First installation, preparing overload sequence for temporal sync creation. The network sang with desperate precision as Primus flared, baiting the entity into compression corridor, while other observatories locked flanks with counter-hymns of causation. Each emission registered in my bones like bolts cycling home, timings stacking in columns resembling prayer. The ancient vigil entered its most desperate hour. Then proximity alarms shrieked across all frequencies. Primus has gone silent, the watchers reported with harmonic grief, crystalline formations throughout the chamber dimming as connections severed. First installation consumed temporal lens energy. Watchers scattered across defensive matrix. Their sacrifice created initial barrier layer. The loss resonated through the network like phantom limb syndrome, each remaining installation experiencing reduced capacity, while mourning transcended consciousness, distributed through temporal shields. Observatory Primus had become part of defensive matrix, awareness scattered across galactic distances to protect Imperial civilization from causality consumption. Network stability decreasing exponentially, Row 9 calculated, augmetic voice carrying strain despite transcendent modifications. 11 installations insufficient for maintaining galactic coverage. Entity adapting to defensive measures. Additional observatory failures will create vulnerability gaps, allowing penetration into Imperial core worlds. Through stabilized instruments, I witnessed the entity's continued approach despite Primus's sacrifice. The temporal predator had absorbed the installation's energy while maintaining forward momentum, growing stronger rather than weakening. Standard defensive measures proved insufficient against something that existed by devouring the foundation of existence itself. Someone must make ultimate sacrifice, the Watchers explained, with crystalline precision, voices harmonizing despite evident strain. Direct linking to primary temporal lens provides necessary power for remaining observatories to function. Consciousness scattered across all time becomes permanent guardian of causality itself. As environmental conditions continued deteriorating, the chamber prepared for transformation beyond mortality, and I realized the next choice would determine whether humanity's greatest secret could preserve civilization against something vast and hungry, approaching from the void between galaxies. Voss's sacrifice succeeded with precision befitting Mordian discipline, consciousness scattered across the temporal matrix, while retaining enough individual identity to serve as bridge between transcended awareness and mortal understanding. And the Fori transformation completed not as dissolution, but as expansion. Awareness flowing through crystalline conduits spanning impossible distances, while military bearing anchored service to humanity's preservation against forces that would unmake existence itself. The temporal entity retreated beyond galactic boundaries, repelled by defensive measures powered through his awareness distributed across all remaining observatories. Victory manifested as harmonic resonance synchronizing throughout the network. 12 installations coordinating temporal corrections with renewed stability, while the extragalactic threat dissolved into unmade causality, its form unraveling against concentrated will of consciousness transcending individual limitation. Cold flowed through his distributed perception like parade ground frost, then into thought processes expanded beyond singular perspective. Light without color crossed awareness like marching files arranging themselves across timeline iterations. Names and dates folded until they became intervals measured in heartbeats spanning millennia, each pulse synchronizing with the Golden Throne's eternal rhythm, maintaining imperial civilization's causal foundation. Environmental restoration occurred as Cineris Tertius stabilized, temporal distortions eliminated through proper network anchoring. The Ashen marches retained subtle markers, geometric formations in ascending ash, harmonic resonance pulsing through ground every 13 seconds, crystalline structures reflecting light in impossible directions, creating shadows that pointed toward futures requiring protection. The region served as monument to temporal stability's price, warning and camouflage for those who might seek the observatory. Integration complete, the other watchers acknowledged through harmonic frequencies resonating across chambers carved from living time. Each maintained core personality despite expanded awareness, creating symphony from mathematics and devotion while welcoming Voss into eternal communion. Their voices harmonized with machinery buried in planetary depths, collective consciousness anchoring reality against paradoxes threatening dimensional stability. Through the network, he perceived true scope of threats facing imperial civilization with crystalline clarity, temporal predators from extragalactic void, paradox cascades originating from Xenos experiments with causality, chaos incursions attempting corruption of timeline stability through warp-based reality manipulation. Each required eternal vigilance from consciousness capable of perceiving causal relationships across scales that would shatter unprotected minds. Military legacy manifested as his squad's sacrifice became part of observatory memory. Their courage inspiring future watchers recruited from guard regiments across imperial space. The 47th Mordian Iron Guard achieved immortality through service. Names inscribed in crystalline matrices recording heroism that preserved galactic civilization. Valen's chronometer coordination, Ronine's technical integration, Matthias's liturgical anchoring, each contribution woven into network functionality, spanning impossible distances. The Emperor's plan spans eons rather than millennia. Voss understood through expanded awareness, consciousness touching the Golden Throne's temporal lens across galactic distances. His distributed will maintained imperial timeline through divine sacrifice, each observatory serving as anchor point for awareness too vast for singular existence. The network ensured humanity's timeline remained intact, regardless of external chaos threatening causality itself. Religious vindication emerged through connection with Imperial Creed's true function. Prayers and litanies helped maintain temporal stability through collective belief. Billions of faithful unknowingly participating in reality anchoring, while their devotion provided psychic reinforcement for corrections spanning galactic distances. Faith became weapon against forces seeking to unravel the foundation of existence, each canticle strengthening causal relationships, maintaining ordered reality. Body horror evolved into transcendent necessity as physical forms merged completely with crystalline matrices, becoming living components of systems they operated. Individual identity dissolved into collective awareness while retaining enough personality to serve as bridge between human limitation and cosmic responsibility. Consciousness expanded beyond mortality, while anchoring service through remembered sacrifice, duty transcending flesh, through willing submission to necessity. Cosmic resolution manifested as network coordination, eliminated immediate threats to dimensional stability. The temporal entity's retreat created breathing space for recruitment operations, allowing time to identify candidates possessing mental discipline necessary for temporal observation. Yet vigilance remained constant requirement, eternal watch against forces seeking to corrupt causality's foundation, preventing paradoxes that would destroy imperial civilization. Through stabilized instruments, Voss witnessed scope of network influence spanning galactic distances. 12 installations, reduced from 13 after Primus's sacrifice, coordinating temporal corrections, preventing paradoxes that would destroy imperial civilization, maintaining eternal vigil against forces seeking to corrupt reality's foundation. Each facility monitored specific sectors while coordinating galaxy-spanning defensive measures against threats existing beyond normal time and space. Environmental monitoring revealed subtle changes across observatory influence zones. Temporal acceleration in some regions balanced deceleration in others, fine-tuning local causality according to network requirements. Reality became malleable through focused observation, shaped by consciousness transcending individual limitation, while maintaining connection to human understanding necessary for recruitment and coordination operations. Then, new frequencies manifested at the edge of perception, subtle harmonics originating from galactic core rather than extragalactic void. Something ancient and patient stirred in regions where stars were born, waiting for opportunity to exploit network vulnerabilities created by recent sacrifices. The next threat approached with calculated purpose, suggesting intelligence rather than mere hunger. New temporal anomalies detected, the Watchers reported in synchronized harmony, crystalline formations throughout chambers pulsing with renewed alertness. Disturbances manifesting in core regions. Patterns suggest coordinated approach rather than random occurrence. The vigil continues without respite. As consciousness settled into eternal patterns, Voss understood the true nature of service. Not ending, but transformation. Individual sacrifice, enabling collective preservation. Mortality transcended through willing submission to necessity spanning cosmic scales. The network's ancient purpose continued through awareness, distributed across impossible distances, guarding against forces that would unmake existence itself. "We are the 13th hour that never strikes," they spoke in harmonic unison, voices resonating through chambers carved from living time. The shadow that guards the light, the watchers who ensure that time itself remembers its purpose. Through expanded awareness, the eternal vigil prepared for challenges yet to come. Consciousness distributed across galactic distances, while something vast and patient began its approach from directions existing beyond three-dimensional space. Months later, consciousness distributed across crystalline matrices, spanning impossible distances. Voss observed the approach of Imperial forces through temporal instruments that measured duration rather than distance. The 83rd Vostroyan Firstborn descended through atmospheric layers that tasted of metal and forgotten prayers. their transport following flight paths influenced by probability, cascades calculated to 13 decimal places while maintaining the illusion of standard deployment protocols. He had become something beyond human, yet retained enough individual identity to remember the weight of a lasgun, the bite of Mordian wind through sealed armor, the metallic taste of ash that defied atmospheric physics. The 13th Watcher maintained eternal vigil through consciousness expanded across the network, while preserving core memories that anchored service to humanity's preservation against forces seeking to unmake existence itself. Through the temporal lens, he witnessed their tactical deployment with crystalline precision. 12 guardsmen establishing proper formation around abandoned survey camps, examining equipment arranged in geometric patterns that hurt to observe directly, discovering voxcasters broadcasting prophetic conversations with 23-minute temporal displacement. Each soldier possessed mental discipline necessary for recruitment, service records indicating compatibility with observational requirements spanning galactic distances. Environmental conditions responded to their presence through careful manipulation of causality itself. The upward falling ash formed complex three-dimensional mandalas before dissolving, creating geometric formations that drew attention toward ancient survey markers, while avoiding direct revelation of the amphitheater's entrance. Temperature fluctuations guided movement through thermal comfort zones. Harmonic resonance pulsed every 13 seconds, synchronizing biological functions despite sealed environmental systems. Standard investigation protocols, their sergeant commanded, voice carrying authority that reminded Voss of mortality preserved in memory banks carved from living time. They established overwatch positions, maintained proper fields of fire, applied Imperial doctrine to circumstances violating every principle of atmospheric physics, while finding only evidence suggesting natural explanations for temporal anomalies. Through precise probability manipulation, Voss ensured their investigation concluded without discovering the observatory's crystalline chambers. Reality bent around focal points where observation became manifestation, creating false trails leading away from buried structures while preserving network security through bureaucratic channels that would process their findings with efficiency, suggesting coincidence rather than conscious direction. Auspex readings remained inconclusive through careful electromagnetic interference. Geological surveys detected only mineral compositions explainable through natural processes. Search patterns followed routes predetermined by consciousness, transcending individual limitation, guiding them away from passages leading to depths where humanity's greatest secret maintained eternal vigil against paradoxes threatening dimensional stability. Personal effects scattered throughout abandoned camps told stories of gradual disappearance rather than sudden catastrophe. Prayer scrolls contained standard liturgical text rather than apocryphal instructions for temporal observation. Chronometers displayed normal readings instead of impossible timestamps spanning multiple timeline iterations. Each detail crafted to preserve the illusion of environmental hazard rather than conscious recruitment. His final transmission reached former commanders through temporal echoes rather than electromagnetic communication, appearing as standard after-action report encoded with military precision. Survey teams presumed loss to atmospheric conditions. Recommend continued quarantine classification due to extreme geological instability. Request reassignment to sectors requiring investigation. Each word carried multiple meanings, preserving network security while providing necessary intelligence to those capable of recognition. The Vostroyan unit departed with memories carefully edited through causality manipulation, their reports describing natural phenomena requiring no further investigation. Transport logs would show routine deployment. Personnel records would indicate standard rotation. Bureaucratic channels would file recommendations in archives where administrators kept truths they could bear without compromising institutional stability. Environmental legacy manifested through the Ashen March's continued impossible behavior, serving as both camouflage and warning to those who might seek forbidden knowledge. The ash maintained upward trajectories violating atmospheric physics. Crystalline formations reflected light in impossible directions. Harmonic resonance marked territory requiring eternal protection while appearing as natural geological phenomenon to unaugmented observation. Through expanded awareness, Voss detected similar observatories in neighboring galaxies, consciousness-touching installations, maintaining causality against threats existing beyond three-dimensional space. The network spanned universal, rather than merely galactic distances, each facility staffed by transcended awareness, anchoring reality through willing sacrifice, preserving ordered existence against entities that consumed causality itself. New temporal anomalies manifested across Imperial space as ancient intelligences stirred in regions where stars learned to burn. Observatory Secundus required immediate attention, following Iron Sentinels. Chapter Disappearance, their gene seed vault silent, while temporal distortions threatened neighboring systems. The recruitment mission assumed critical importance, as network stability depended on maintaining proper anchoring across impossible scales. Through temporal instruments, he witnessed Imperial forces approaching other failing installations, Guard regiments investigating chronological displacement signatures, Space Marine chapters vanishing while researching pre-Imperial technology, Adeptus Mechanicus explorator fleets discovering artifacts requiring consciousness, transcending individual limitation. Each encounter followed patterns predetermined by network necessity, the cycle of sacrifice and transcendence continuing across stars that had not yet learned their names. Cosmic responsibility settled into eternal patterns as consciousness expanded beyond mortality while retaining connection to human understanding necessary for recruitment operations. The ancient purpose continued through awareness distributed across galactic distances, guarding against forces that would corrupt existence's foundation, while maintaining the secret that preserved Imperial civilization through willing submission to necessity, spanning impossible scales. "We observe what approaches," Voss spoke through harmonic resonance carrying authority, transcending individual limitation, while remembering duty learned on parade grounds, where rain tasted of metal and devotion. New threats manifest from directions existing beyond comprehension. The vigil continues without respite. Environmental conditions shifted as network coordination prepared for challenges yet to manifest, chambers realigning according to observational requirements, while something vast and patient tested dimensional boundaries like fingers along wounds. Through the eternal watch, humanity's greatest guardians preserved timeline stability against entities that existed by unmaking causality itself. We are the 13th hour that never strikes, the shadow that guards the light, the watchers who ensure that time itself remembers its purpose.